You know that feeling when you're faced with a ton of new information? Maybe it's a dense report, a complex project at work, or even just trying to get your head around a new hobby and you just wish there was a way to understand it all more quickly and effectively without feeling like you're, well, drowning in the details.
Absolutely. We're constantly navigating this flood of information, aren't we? And the real skill is uh, finding those shortcuts to understanding the tools that help us make sense of complexity.
Well, that's precisely what we're digging into today. We're going to explore a fascinating concept called an advance organizer. Think of it as a kind of mental jumpstart, a way to prepare your brain to absorb and retain new and challenging material more efficiently.
Hmm.
Our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack what these advanced organizers are, what the research actually says about how they work, and most importantly, how this knowledge can be a real game changer for you, our listener, who wants to learn smarter, not just harder.
Right. And to really get a handle on this, we've looked closely at a review of 30 different experiments. Now, these studies, they were conducted over the 14 years following a significant publication back in 92, and they all focused on advanced organizers presented in, like, a written paragraph format.
Okay.
And the consistent finding, really, across this body of research, is that these kinds of organizers generally do help with remembering information.
Okay, let's unpack this term a bit more then. Advance organizer. It sounds, I don't know, rather formal. Where did this idea even come from?
Yeah, it does sound a bit academic. The concept was first formally proposed by David Ausubel way back in 1960. But for him, it wasn't just about a study technique. It was really rooted in his broader theory of how we learn, something he called cognitive subsumption.
Cognitive subsumption. Okay, that sounds
Yeah.
technical.
It does, yeah. But the core idea is actually quite intuitive. Ausubel believed that we learn new things best when we can connect them to existing knowledge that's already stored in our brains. He kind of imagined our knowledge as being organized in a hierarchy, right? With broad general ideas at the top and then more specific details underneath.
Okay.
So his thinking was that if you could introduce these higher level, more inclusive concepts before the new material, it would create these mental hooks for that new information to attach to. And that's the role of advanced organizers, to provide those initial overarching ideas up front.
Ah, okay, so it's kind of like getting a bird's eye view of the landscape before you start hiking the trail.
Exactly, yeah, perfect analogy. Ausubel's aim was really to see if by providing learners with these relevant big picture ideas first, they could significantly improve their ability to learn and recall unfamiliar information. And he conducted a series of early experiments to test this out.
Right. And were the results from those initial experiments like clear and consistent? Did it just work?
Well, not entirely. While Ausubel's early studies did show some promising support for his ideas, the field pretty soon saw debate and, mixed findings emerged from other researchers. That's partly why we're doing this deep dive to explore that history and see what the more recent research maybe clarifies for you.
All right, so let's delve into Ausubel's original thinking in more detail. How exactly did he define an advanced organizer? What was it specifically?
Okay. So according to Ausubel, an advanced organizer is material that's presented to the learner before they encounter the main learning content. And a key characteristic is that it operates at a higher level of abstraction, generality, and inclusiveness. So think of it as a broad framework that sort of encompasses the more specific details that will follow.
And what was the intended effect of presenting this high-level stuff first? What was it supposed to do in our minds?
Right. The primary goal was that this more general information would activate those existing broader knowledge structures we talked about earlier. This activation would then provide a kind of mental scaffolding, what Ausubel actually termed ideational scaffolding, that learners could use to organize and categorize the new information as they encountered it. It's like setting up the main categories in a filing system before you start putting in the individual documents.
Yeah.
This scaffolding was also believed to help with both integrating the detailed material into your existing knowledge and, crucially, remembering it over time.
That makes sense. So did Ausubel think all advanced organizers were the same, or were there different types for different situations?
No, he actually identified two main types, and the choice really depended on how familiar the learner was with the material. The first type is the expository advanced organizer. This is used when the material is completely new and unfamiliar to the learner. The main purpose here is to provide relevant and familiar proximate subsumers, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar concepts that are at a higher level of generality than the new information. Ausubel called this providing ideational anchorage, giving the learner something they already understand to connect the new unfamiliar concepts to.
Okay, so if I were trying to learn about something really out there, like, I don't know, string theory, an expository organizer might use analogies to more familiar physics concepts I already kind of know, just to give me a starting point.
Exactly. It's all about building that bridge from the known to the unknown. Now, the second type is the comparative advance organizer. This is used when the new material is relatively familiar, meaning it likely relates to concepts the learner already has some understanding of.
Right.
The goal here isn't just to introduce new anchors, but really to help integrate the new ideas with these similar existing concepts.
Mm.
It aims to enhance discriminability, helping the learner see the key differences between the new information and what they already know, especially if those existing ideas might be easily confused with the new ones.
So a comparative organizer is more about sharpening my understanding by highlighting both the similarities and the differences between new and existing knowledge.
Precisely, yeah. For example, if you were learning about, say, a new type of social media platform, a comparative organizer might draw parallels and contrasts with platforms you're already familiar with, like Twitter or Instagram, to help you really grasp its unique features.
Mm.
So, if you're tackling a completely new field versus something maybe tangentially related to your current expertise,
Yeah.
that would dictate which type of mental advance organizer you should try to create for yourself, right?
Interesting. Okay. So Ozabel put these ideas to the test with actual studies. What did his initial experiments reveal? Did they back up the theory?
Well, his very first experiment in 1960 focused on learning about the metallurgical properties of plain carbon steel, a topic that was likely quite unfamiliar to his university student
Yeah,
participants.
sounds.
Definitely. One group received a 500-word expository advance organizer before studying the main text, while a control group received just a historical introduction of similar length. When they were tested with a multiple-choice test 3 days later, the group that had received the advance organizer performed significantly better.
Uh,
So this early result seemed to provide pretty strong support for his theory, at least for unfamiliar material. So the key takeaway here for how an advanced organizer helps you learn more effectively in such situations is by providing that initial foundational knowledge, that anchor.
that's a pretty compelling early win for the concept then. What did he look at next?
Well, in 1961, Ozabel and Fitzgerald explored a topic that was still likely unfamiliar to students, but maybe a bit more relatable. They used a passage about Buddhism. They compared the effects of a comparative organizer that linked Christianity and Buddhism, an expository organizer that just explained Buddhist doctrine at a high level without mentioning Christianity, and then a standard historical introduction. The introductory materials were actually provided 2 days before the main text on Buddhism, and the students were tested both 3 days and 10 days later.
And what did they find this time? Was it the same pattern?
Interestingly, at the 3-day mark, the group that received the comparative organizer actually outperformed the other two groups.
Oh.
Yeah, and by the 10-day mark, both the comparative and the expository organizer groups showed significantly better performance than the group that had only received the historical introduction. But what's really interesting for you, the listener, is that they also observed that students with lower academic ability seemed to benefit the most from having access to an organizer.
Mm.
It seemed to provide a crucial framework for comparison that they might not have spontaneously developed on their own, helping them to better differentiate the new information.
That's a fascinating insight that advanced organizers might sort of act as a compensatory mechanism for those who maybe lack strong internal organizational skills.
Yeah.
Did he delve into that further?
Yes, absolutely. In 1962, Ozabel and Fitzgerald conducted 2 more experiments, this time focusing on hormonal factors in pubescence. In the first of these, they used an expository advance organizer and also looked at the participants' verbal ability. Now, while the overall effect of the organizer wasn't quite statistically significant across the entire group,
Okay.
they did find that it was helpful for those in the lower third of verbal ability. This suggested that individuals with stronger verbal skills might already possess the ability to spontaneously organize new material effectively on their own. So what's the key takeaway here for how an advanced organizer helps you learn more effectively in this kind of situation? It seems it provides that extra scaffolding for those who might not naturally create it themselves.
So the organizer was almost acting as an external cognitive tool for those who weren't as naturally adept at structuring new information.
Precisely, yeah. And in the second experiment that year, they wondered if there was a sequential effect. Would having an organizer for one unfamiliar topic help with learning a second related one? They used the same subjects and presented a second passage on pathological variations in pubescence, but this time without providing any new organizer or introduction.
Did it help?
Interestingly, no. They found no significant differences between the groups. They speculated that this might have been because the students hadn't fully grasped the first passage. So this suggests that the foundational understanding needs to be reasonably solid for subsequent organizers to be truly effective in building upon it.
Interesting. Yeah, it highlights that the effectiveness of the roadmap also depends on whether you've actually mastered the first part of the journey before trying to navigate the next.
Exactly. And the final study in this early series, conducted in 1963, revisited the passage about Buddhism. This time, they took into account the students' prior knowledge of Christianity, as well as their verbal ability. They compared two comparative advance organizers, one for general Buddhism and one for Zen Buddhism, with historical introductions. The key finding relevant to you was that having prior knowledge of Christianity definitely made it easier to learn about Buddhism.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Additionally, the group that received the comparative advance organizer for general Buddhism showed better recall than the group that had the historical introduction. However, they didn't find significant effects for learning about Zen Buddhism, possibly because the initial material on general Buddhism was still too new, too unfamiliar for the learners to effectively differentiate it from the more specific concepts of Zen Buddhism.
Right.
So what's the key takeaway here for how an advance organizer helps you learn more effectively? It really underscores the power of connecting new information to existing relevant knowledge.
So the prior knowledge itself acted almost like a natural advance organizer in that situation. It provided the hooks.
Precisely. Yeah, it provided those existing cognitive anchors that Ausubel was talking about.
Okay, so those are the findings from the early research. But as we touched on earlier, there was also criticism of this concept, wasn't there? What were some of the main points of contention?
Yeah, there was. One of the most influential critiques came from Barnes and Clausen in their comprehensive 1975 review. They analyzed 32 different studies, and their conclusion was basically that they couldn't find any clear and consistent patterns of effectiveness for advanced organizers across this whole body of research.
Wow.
Yeah, this review really raised significant questions about the practical utility of the concept at the time.
So after all that initial promise from Ausubel's own work, a major review cast considerable doubt. What was the central issue, according to Barnes and Clausen? Why the inconsistency?
Well, a crucial point, and one that's been heavily emphasized by later researchers, is that many of the studies that Barnes and Clausen reviewed didn't actually use advance organizers in the way that Ausubel originally defined them.
Ah, okay.
They essentially grouped together a very wide range of pre-reading activities under the label advance organizer. Things like just providing headings, posing questions before reading, using visuals, even incorporating simulation games and audio aids. These methods just didn't meet Ausubel's specific criteria, being paragraph form material presented before learning and operating at that higher level of abstraction, generality, and inclusiveness.
Right.
So for you, the listener, it's really important to understand that not every pre-reading activity is the same as an advance organizer as Ausubel conceived it. There's a specific definition here.
So it was essentially a problem of inconsistent definition and application of the concept in the research itself. Apples and oranges, maybe.
Exactly. It's like trying to study the effectiveness of, say, interval training, but including studies that looked at jogging, swimming, and weightlifting, all in your analysis. This lack of precision just made it very difficult to draw any reliable conclusions about the true effectiveness of Ausubel's specific type of advance organizer.
Okay.
Barnes and Clausen themselves suggested that future research should focus on looking at the long-term effects of organizers, exploring their use in different subject areas, and using recall-based tests, like asking people to write down what they remember, rather than just recognition-based tests like multiple choice.
And did the research community take these criticisms seriously? Did the understanding of how advanced organizers might actually work evolve after that critique?
Yes, it really did, significantly. Researchers began to refine their understanding of the cognitive processes involved. For instance, in 1979, Richard Mayer proposed his assimilation encoding hypothesis. His idea was that advanced organizers do more than just provide a general framework. They actively help the reader activate relevant prior knowledge, those anchoring concepts, and encourage a more active process of integrating the new information with what they already know.
Ah.
So it's less about simply slotting new information under a pre-existing heading and more about truly assimilating it into your existing web of knowledge. So for you, what these later theories really emphasize is that it's not enough to just have a mental roadmap. You need to actively try to connect the new information to what you already know and be prepared to adjust your existing understanding as you learn.
So it's a more dynamic and interactive process of linking new and old information, less passive.
Precisely. Then, in 1984, Stella Derry built upon this with her assimilation plus correction process. She suggested that when we read and learn, ideas that align with our existing mental frameworks, our schemas, are pretty easily assimilated. However, when we encounter new or inconsistent ideas, it leads to a modification or correction of those existing schemas.
Okay.
From this perspective, advanced organizers function by suggesting a relevant schema to begin with, making it easier for the learner to then process and integrate the new information.
Okay, so the current understanding then is that advanced organizers act as a kind of signal, suggesting a helpful mental framework, which we then actively work with, elaborating on it and modifying it as we encounter the new information.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interplay between accessing a likely existing structure and then refining and updating it through your engagement with the text. This more nuanced understanding, really shaped by the work of researchers like Mayer and Derry, provides a much better lens through which to interpret the more recent research on advanced organizers.
Which brings us neatly to the research that came after that influential 1975 review. You mentioned earlier that studies that stuck more closely to Ausubel's original definition tended to show more positive effects.
Yes, that's a really crucial point. The 1992 review we've been focusing on specifically looked at studies published since 1975 that used paragraph form advanced organizers presented before the learning material and that clearly met Ausubel's criteria for generality, inclusiveness, and abstraction. And what's really telling for you, the listener, is that out of the 29 experiments included in 16 different articles that fit this much stricter definition, a significant majority, 24 of them, reported that advanced organizers did indeed have a facilitating effect on recall.
Wow, okay. That paints a much more convincing picture of their potential benefits when used as intended. But you also mentioned that there were still a few studies, 5 of them, that didn't find a positive effect. What might have been happening in those situations?
Yeah, there are several interesting possibilities suggested for the lack of benefit in those particular studies. For example, in their 1986 research, Stallings and Derry found no advantage of using advanced organizers when reading time was severely limited, to the point where it likely caused information overload.
Right.
They also found no benefit when participants were dealing with significant real-world distractions, like poor quality copies of the text and having music playing. This really suggests that advanced organizers, while helpful, they can't really overcome severely compromised learning environments. It's like, even the clearest instructions won't help if you can't actually see the road or hear over the noise.
That makes perfect sense. Even the best mental preparation isn't going to be enough if the basic conditions for learning are just too poor.
Exactly. Another study by Peterson and colleagues in 1980 found no facilitation when participants had very short reading times, like 15 minutes, for quite long essays, and their recall was measured using a multiple-choice test. Unfortunately, the actual content of their advanced organizer wasn't included in the published article, which makes it difficult to really assess its quality or relevance. Then in 1977, Rickards and McCormick found no significant difference in learning whether the organizer was presented before the text, interspersed within it, or not presented at all. This was in a study using a passage about a fictitious African nation, but interspersing it really goes against the core idea of it being an advanced organizer, setting the stage before you encounter the details.
Absolutely. That doesn't really fit the definition, does it? It's like trying to get the punchline before you've heard the setup. It just doesn't work the same way.
Precisely. And finally, Peleg and Moore's 1982 study found no benefit for junior high students who were classified as educably mentally retarded. And they even found a negative effect when the organizer was presented orally rather than written. This suggests that there might be a lower threshold of cognitive ability where the abstract nature of some advanced organizers could actually become confusing rather than helpful.
Okay.
It really hints that the design and delivery of the organizer need to be carefully considered for different learners.
So it really underscores that the context of learning the time, the distractions, and the individual learner's characteristics are crucial factors in determining whether an advanced organizer will actually be effective.
Absolutely. But let's pivot now and focus on the studies that did demonstrate positive effects, because these offer really valuable insights for you on how to best leverage the principles of advanced organizers in your own learning.
Okay, great.
One key finding relates to the timing of presentation. Research by Mayer and Bromage in 1980, as well as several studies by Rickards back in the mid-70s, consistently showed that organizers presented before the reading material had a significantly greater impact on recall, particularly for conceptual ideas, and the ability to make inferences compared to organizers presented after reading.
Right.
And even when organizers were interspersed within the text, They were most effective when they immediately preceded the related information. This really reinforces the importance of setting that mental framework before you dive into the specifics.
That strongly supports the advance part of the name, doesn't it? Prepare your mind beforehand, like stretching before a workout, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, good analogy. Another fascinating finding comes from Tudor's 1986 work with second language learners. They discovered that advanced organizers presented a learner's native language, English in this case, helped lower proficiency French learners complete closed tests, those fill-in-the-blank tests, more accurately.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. This suggests that advanced organizers can serve as a bridge, helping learners access their existing knowledge to understand and extract information, even when the main material is in a less familiar language. So for you, if you're tackling information in a domain where you have some background knowledge, but maybe the presentation is challenging, perhaps due to jargon or complex sentence structures, a self-created advanced organizer summarizing the core concepts in simpler terms could be incredibly beneficial.
That's a really useful takeaway. The organizer can act as a linguistic bridge as well as a conceptual one.
Precisely. Furthermore, Mayer's 1978 research demonstrated that organizers can even help compensate for poorly organized text. When information about computer programming was presented in a random, disorganized fashion, students who had received an advanced organizer performed significantly better, especially those with lower math ability. The organizer seemed to provide what Mayer called an assimilative context, helping learners make sense of the jumbled information. So for you, if you're ever faced with dense or maybe poorly structured information, actively trying to create your own high-level outline or summary beforehand could be a really powerful strategy.
That's incredibly practical advice, turning a weakness in the material into an opportunity to strengthen your own understanding by imposing structure.
Absolutely. The research also examined the role of reading ability. Now, the findings here were somewhat mixed, but some studies, like Holzman and colleagues' 1981 research with students reading below their grade level, suggested that less skilled readers can benefit from advanced organizers, provided they have the basic decoding skills and, crucially, understand how to use the information presented in the organizer.
Oh.
However, studies also indicated that simply providing a diagrammatic organizer wasn't consistently more effective than a written one for poor readers. And Linz et al.'s 1987 work highlighted that students with learning disabilities might need explicit instruction on how to use organizers effectively. This underscores that while advanced organizers can be helpful, they are a tool that needs to be used correctly, and some learners might require guidance on how to do so.
So it's not a magic bullet, not a one-size-fits-all solution, and some learners might need support in learning how to wield this tool effectively.
Exactly. Mayer's 1980 research also explored the impact of advanced organizers on problem solving. He found that organizers helped students solve more complex computer programming problems and appeared to assist students with lower math ability in tackling conceptual problem-solving tasks. This suggests that advanced organizers can aid in what's known as far transfer, applying knowledge learned in one context to new and different situations. So for you, if you're trying to develop problem-solving skills in a new area, starting with a high-level understanding of the core principles could significantly improve your ability to apply that knowledge later on.
That's a really powerful outcome, not just memorizing facts, but actually being able to use the knowledge in new and meaningful ways. That's often the goal, right?
Absolutely. Finally, several studies looked at elaboration techniques and how learners actually attend to the organizer. Adejumo and Ehindero's 1980 research found that for younger or lower ability learners, reading the organizer and then writing about it was more beneficial than just reading it.
Hmm.
However, for older or higher ability learners, simply reading the organizer was often sufficient. This suggests that actively engaging with the organizer, maybe by summarizing or paraphrasing it, can be particularly helpful for some learners in focusing their attention on the key concepts and connecting them to their prior knowledge.
Okay, so making it active.
Yes, and Dinnell and Glover's 1985 work strongly supported this. They showed that paraphrasing the organizer significantly improved recall of both the organizer itself and the main passage content, much more so than just listing keywords or passively reading. They basically concluded that the organizer needs to be remembered in order to be effective later.
Makes sense.
Building on this, Corkill and colleagues' 1988B research even found that rereading a previously paraphrased organizer right before attempting to recall the main material, even after a delay of more than a day, could further enhance memory. And Importantly, in related research in 1988, Corkill et al. Also found that concrete organizers, those that used clear and specific examples, tended to be more effective than abstract ones.
Right.
So for you, actively thinking about the organizer, maybe even summarizing it in your own words, and looking for those concrete examples can really boost its effectiveness. Don't just glance at it.
Wow, so it's really not just about being presented with an advanced organizer. It's so much about how it's designed, concrete, clear, and how we actively engage with it, like paraphrasing. That's a lot of valuable, actionable information. So, based on all this research we've discussed, what would you say are the absolute key elements of an effective advanced organizer? If someone wanted to create one for themselves, what should they focus on?
Yeah. Drawing from this body of research, a truly effective advance organizer seems to have several key characteristics. First and foremost, as we've stressed, it needs to be presented before the main learning material.
Right. Advanced.
Advance, exactly. It should ideally be in a written paragraph format, as that was the focus of this specific review. It should be written in a concrete and clear manner, using specific language and avoiding overly abstract or technical terms that might not be familiar yet.
Okay.
And crucially, it should often include an example that explicitly illustrates the relationship between the broad ideas in the organizer and the more specific material that will follow. This helps to make those initial connections much, much clearer.
That emphasis on concrete examples really resonates. It's like providing a tangible illustration of the abstract concept, making it less fuzzy.
Exactly. It grounds the abstract idea.
And based on this 1992 review of research, what did the authors suggest as potential future directions for studying advanced organizers? What are the big questions that still need to be answered?
Yeah, the authors of the review pointed to several important areas for future research. They highlighted the ongoing need for a more precise and maybe universally accepted definition of what constitutes a truly high-quality advanced organizer. What makes one better than another. There's also a call for more research, specifically investigating how learners' reading abilities interact with the effectiveness of different types of advanced organizers. We saw hints, but more clarity is needed.
Right.
Furthermore, they emphasize the importance of looking beyond just measuring recall, how much you remember, and exploring how advanced organizers impact deeper levels of comprehension. Things like the ability to make inferences, understand cause and effect relationships, grasp the overall purpose of the material.
Yeah, the why not just the what.
Exactly. And finally, they stress the need for research that examines how to ensure learners actively attend to and process the advanced organizer effectively. Maybe investigating the use of techniques like prompting learners to paraphrase or elaborate on the organizer's content, building on those findings we discussed.
So to bring this all back to you, our listener, who's constantly seeking ways to learn more effectively in this world just overflowing with information, what's the single most important thing to take away from our deep dive into advanced organizers today?
I think the key takeaway is that when they're used thoughtfully and designed well, advanced organizers can indeed be a genuinely powerful tool to enhance your learning and improve your ability to remember new information. The research, particularly when you focus on organizers that really adhere to Ausubel's original concept, that Paris form presented beforehand, higher level provides compelling evidence of their potential to facilitate memory.
Yeah.
And this aligns perfectly with your desire for efficient and thorough knowledge acquisition. Right.
Right, absolutely. So even if the information you're trying to learn doesn't come neatly packaged with an official advanced organizer created by someone else, understanding these core principles is still incredibly valuable for you to apply yourself.
Absolutely. By grasping the importance of establishing that initial overview, actively connecting new information to your existing knowledge, and seeking out or even creating for yourself concrete examples to bridge the gap between abstract concepts and specific details, you can essentially create your own advanced organizers in your mind before you even dive into the complexities.
That's a really empowering thought. So as you approach your next learning challenge, whether it's a new skill, a complex report, or just trying to understand a new idea, maybe consider this. How can you actively think about the overarching themes and connect them to what you already know before you get lost in the details? Could this act of mentally preparing the ground be your own personal advanced organizer, leading to deeper understanding and better long-term retention?
It's definitely a strategy worth experimenting with in your next learning endeavor.